Okay, everybody, welcome back to Ending the Stigma, A Path to Recovery. Today, you can see we have a guest, Melissa C. Water. Is it Water or Waters? What is it, with an S?
Water.
Water. Just water.
Mhm.
So, Melissa C. Water, she is an author. She's a Canadian author. So, she's from Canada. So, as I told her before, we're not going to hold that against her. And I never would. But, so Melissa, we have people might be familiar with you who listen to my other podcast. Scott's also here. Scott H. Silverman. You could say hello, Scott. I forgot about you.
That's okay, Fred. See, there's one of those issues I was talking about, Melissa, that he does. Yeah, it's nice to be here, Fred. Thank you so much for acknowledging me and allowing me to be part of. Clearly, your new job and the medication that we've prescribed for you are all not working together yet, but it takes a little time to make those adjustments. We're going to get there.
So this is your first time meeting Melissa. So Melissa, Scott, Melissa. Now the introduction's done.
How are you?
Melissa has so many talents and skills. First of all, she has a YouTube channel with 5.5 million views. Very difficult to get. She has approaching 30,000 subscribers on her YouTube channel. She's been doing it for a long time. She writes. She's an author of how many books? 3 books? 4 books? 3 books. She has written articles for the Montreal Gazette, and she also has Tourette's syndrome, among other mental health issues, and she talks openly about them, and we're going to talk to her today about it. So how are you, my friend Melissa?
I am doing well.
Good. And how is Montreal today? Montreal going well? Is the weather good for you?
Kind of windy out there.
Okay.
We might get carried away.
So why don't you start by explaining, let's start with the Tourette's and explain to people what Tourette's exactly is.
So Tourette syndrome, which often people think is Tourette's, but the person that it was named after actually was a neurologist who discovered the disorder, and it was named after him. So he didn't have it. So it's not like possessive to Gilles de la Tourette, which is the man. So it's Tourette syndrome, which is a neurological disorder. And it's basically movements, noises, words, like a bunch of salad words kind of like piled in together. It doesn't mean anything. It's not what we're thinking. And it's most commonly noises, but it can be also, in a percentage of the time, swearing, which is not voluntary. And it's not, again, not what we're thinking, more likely what we're afraid to say, and more likely against a person's principles than going along with it.
Okay, so Scott, what do you have to ask her about it? Do you have you dealt with this before, Scott, in your life? Have you met anybody with Tourette's?
You know, over the years, episodically, I can't tell you I'm close to many people. I think that, you know, it's interesting when you use the word syndrome versus, you know, a disorder, because I think that disorders are sometimes things that can be controlled or perceived differently, or they're stigmatized versus a syndrome. I mean, like PTS, for example, I don't like the disorder at the end of it because I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's a syndrome, and it happens to some people. And somebody like myself who, you know, is in long-term recovery and not suffers, but yeah, you know, I was born with ADHD, and you really can't just take a wrench and fix it. That we all have things that go on. I just think that, you know, Tourette's are obviously and can be a lot more upfront and on the table, so to speak. So that, you know, it's nice to hear you talk about it openly and clearly with your exposure on the internet and YouTube and being an author, you've gotten comfortable talking about it. And I got to believe in my heart that only helps people who suffer from it or have been exposed to it or live with somebody who has it. They can deal with it differently, because anytime you can feel like you're less alone with something or not alone with something, you're always with somebody else. It kind of lessens the burden of having to, you know, carry it around or try to figure out, what do I do with this? I mean, well, nothing. It's, you just accept it for what it is, and then you move forward.
Yeah, it's definitely and she's very open with it when she's, you know, she was on my other show, and she's such a a spark plug. She's got a great sense of humor. First of all, so what do people assume? What is the negatives that they assume of you? You had mentioned on my other show about gaining thick skin due to people talking behind your back when you're out in public and stuff. Is that something you still deal with on a daily basis?
Less with COVID because we're not outside as much.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I guess my skin is thick enough by now, so it doesn't impact me as much as it did. I'd say that it took a long time and a lot of encouragement from people supporting me, saying, it's okay, it's not your fault. If I would swear and I would cover my mouth and I was horrified. Like I didn't want to be doing those things or saying those things. I was the kind that when someone would swear, I was like, you could say this word instead, and that's kosher. And then I had Tourette syndrome, and then I couldn't help but say it. So I became a sailor anyways, because I was kind of jaded, but I got used to it. And as long as people know that it's Tourette syndrome, then they're generally pretty tolerable. And it's rare that there'll be backlash in terms of comments. Say they might not say it to my face, but they'll say something like, "I'm so tired of this Tourette syndrome bullshit," and that's the kind of thing that might make me feel bad. But at the same time, I'd be tired of it too. So, but it doesn't mean they're tired of me. It just means that the noises are getting they don't want to hear me yelling donkey balls or something. So,
right. And it's so unique. You, from the minute when I did meet you initially, and I saw your videos and stuff, watching the rundown. Scott, if you ever end up on our YouTube channel, make sure you have about 8 hours of time. It becomes a rabbit hole because it's so interesting. First of all, she loves act. She makes these professional videos. She makes little movies, and she's different characters in the movies, and she produces them. She loves wigs, correct? You love wigs. You're a wig.
I do.
Yes.
They're mostly identifiers for the roles that I play. So I'll put on one wig for one character, film all their lines, and then film the other lines with the other characters, mash it together, and it looks like they're talking to each other. So really, it's not that I'm obsessed with wigs. It's mostly that I like that they identify the characters, and I find them fun.
So
interesting. I heard Dolly Parton was being interviewed last night. She's really big into changing her hairstyle, and she was, I don't know, one of those talk shows. I can't remember the name of the guy. He's a big producer, has some of the big wives of Orange County, of New Jersey. He's that producer, but he was interviewing her last night live and asking her supposedly questions that guests submitted, but I think he kind of made up his own and was really putting her on the spot. It was kind of fun to watch her, because she's a legend, Dolly Parton. She's been around so long and she's known so many people and done some interesting work. But she talked about her hair for a little while. And I know when she did her little tour of her motorhome, not a motorhome, a nice RV, and she opened up this wig closet and must have had 100 different hair pieces. That's what she takes on the road. I don't know how I got off on hair, but anyway, back to you.
So listen, we all get off. This is what the show is. That's what a live show is all about. Now, Melissa, you don't do a lot of live shows, have you?
A few.
Because your podcast is great also. And explain to people about your podcast, what you talk about.
So the podcast is called The Bag System. It's about dissociative identity disorder, which from here on out, that's a big word. So we'll call it DID, which means multiple personality disorder, or that's what it was called until 1994. And it got a terrible rap in terms of this is fake, but it's overrated. It's fantasy stuff, but that was because the way it was presented, it was blown out of proportion. It was being considered like it was this thing that was science fiction, and it was too hyped up. So it got to the point where people were, I think a lot of the clinicians were amping it up to the point where it was wow, it was like this unicorn to have a patient with DID. And really the media amplified it to where they were mostly criminals. And then it was mostly seen as this crazy thing, but really all it is a failure to integrate the self. So when we're very small, when we're young, we're born without like an integrated self, like what we call like an alter ego, without being like an alter. But then that can develop. So it doesn't mean we have DID when we're born. It just means that we have the possibility to not merge, and those egos can remain separate. So it's really not this big crazy thing. It's really, all it means is that the trauma or neglect or anything can cause like a separation of the self and the unique parts of the self to develop. It's not like super science fiction. It's not fancy. It's not like, wow. It's really just, something you cope with. And
so I could tell Scott real quick about what the bag system. So the name of her podcast is The Bag System. I'm going to do my best from her previous answer. So she has what she calls headmates, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Headmates, Scott, are her other personalities, correct? So far, Melissa?
Yes.
Okay. Headmates. I got confused when she said it. I thought headmates was a Canadian term for roommates. I was lost completely because she's trying to tell me about her headmates. I'm thinking she's talking about roommates. I was lost. And it has to do with a bag of Skittles, I believe. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So explain it from there.
So one thing I will specify is that I usually say identity rather than personality, because otherwise it's perceived like a personality disorder, whereas it's the dissociative disorder. So while mainly people do say personality, like everyone has a variance in personalities. So it's not like, hey, sometimes I like fries and sometimes I like pickles, and like sometimes I like pickles with my fries, and sometimes I go to France and I talk like a friend, like I'm from France. Like that's just a variance in who you are. It's not identity. So I just wanted to specify that for anyone who might think it's like borderline personality. But basically, yeah, headmate means an alter or an alternate identity. And so I made a joke in saying, I'm dissociating into a bag of Skittles, taste the rainbow. And then I had a headmate who thought that was really funny. And the next time she appeared, she said to my sister-in-law, I'm the best smile in this bag of Skittles.
So how many headmates do you have?
To be determined. It's not that they're growing technically. It's just that I don't personally know. Most with the DID don't know that they have it. And like, at least not the person who's at the front most often, which would be me, Melissa. So those, like, because it's something that your system doesn't want you to know because they don't want anyone else to know. It's okay. Because amnesia, all the above. But yeah.
Because one of the things I like to talk about is when I meet people that I think I could spend time with. I said it would really be cool to take a long trip in a motorhome with someone who could bring things to the table that you don't necessarily pack in your luggage when you put your luggage on the RV, but you're going down the road and you're like, oh my, look at that, that's exciting. So now we've got all kinds of great stuff that we can talk about, and just sometimes it's just honesty and candor and transparency and the truth, whatever that is. It can be fun to experience.
What I wondered, and this is what I love about Melissa, is I could ask her questions that normally would be perceived as, I guess, stupid questions, but she doesn't believe that there's any stupid questions. She just answers them. So I was wondering, when you came on the last show, you had told me you had the DID. What would have happened if you were, I don't even know the term to use, as the other person on the show? Would I know the difference? Would I see a difference if you were afflicted by it? I don't even know if afflicted is the word. This is where I tiptoe around her. She likes getting me uncomfortable too, Scott. You could tell she enjoys this a little, that I'm tiptoeing.
Yeah. Well, knowing what I know about you, Fred, you pretty much kind of help yourself along real well with that path of discomfortability. So you like to walk in there. I try to get
the question. Basically what I was wondering was, I made an appointment with Melissa to come on the podcast. Now, would her other identity, am I saying it right? Identity, know she scheduled a podcast that day?
Maybe not all of them.
Okay.
So those
some of them may not be invited. Because some of them may already know Fred and realize there's no way I'm going on this platform to expose myself to this guy who could potentially, make me feel better about myself or make me irritated or create some sort of a vortex that I may not quite understand. And Fred never does that on purpose. He innocently.
I'm intuitive. I need to know. I like to ask questions. As a writer, it makes a difference for me because of character structure and stuff like that. I look at all humans as characters in my world, my writer's world. And I'm just intrigued by people that are open and honest. And it was similar to you, Scott, talking about your addiction recovery and stuff. Scott's 38 years now, right?
Right. But does that start from your perspective of being curious, do you think, Fred?
And it's curious, it's nosy, it's bold, it's everything in between. I am right between Boston and New York. I don't tiptoe very often around issues and things. We move fast, we talk fast, and we are inappropriate at most times.
Got it. So, Melissa, I want to ask you, how old are you?
Million.
Uh-oh. Don't ask her that, Scott. She does not talk about her age.
All right.
So I tell people once in a while in a blue moon when
I know.
Okay, not important. I guess my real question is when you were growing up, can you share an aha moment that happened when you turned a corner and had some understanding about what was going on rather than not knowing what was going on? Does that question make sense? And the reason I ask how old you are, I'm just going to try to say over a period of time. So I don't need to know chronologically how old you are. Just I'm curious when you were younger, because there must be people out there who have no idea what this is. And there's actually someone else, just as a sidebar, I've seen on YouTube, a young woman who has a similar situation that you have. And she's got quite a following, and she's very funny. And she uses profanity probably every third word, and does it with a smile on her face in a way that it almost sounds, godlike or angelic. But anyway, so back to the question. So when you were younger, when did you turn that corner or have an understanding or epiphany, or you understand what I mean, or a burning bush, or go ahead.
So I would say that I didn't realize fully. I dismissed it. That's weird. I'm just like, what was that? And I would go for pretty much until a few years ago when I found out, because I've only known that I have DID since the end of 2019. And most of those with DID don't know until later in life. You don't know because you have these amnesia barriers, blah, blah, blah. But for me, I would say that the things that I dismissed as quirks were that I don't always refer to myself as I. I say we, we need to do this. We have one mouth. We have one body. Well, and then I would say, I would experience what we call co-conscious switches, where that means that you're aware of what happens when the other headmate appears. So I would have a co-conscious switch, and I would remember it. And I would, for me, to partly answer the previous question, was that I lost my thought.
Okay.
So yeah, I would realize it afterwards that something was weird, because people were staring, and it showed. While most cases with DID you won't notice because it's what's called covert, but in my case it's overt. So when I have a switch, it's very obvious,
right.
Which is about 6% of cases. But in that case, say I would react to something and it was opposite to my own feelings. I would feel my feelings and I was kind of maybe neutral about something, while someone else was super excited and very, very much younger. And then I would act like a 4-year-old when I was really just not. And it was baffling. And for a while I thought, well, I must be the weirdest manic in the world. I just have these weird episodes where I'm exceedingly happy, or I just thought this has to be mania or something, which it wasn't. But I thought maybe this is mania. I dismissed it. This is a quirk. This must be this. This is just me being nuts. If I hear a voice in my head saying my name or talking to me or talking to each other, I mean, I I had stopped to think, maybe, do you think is that like, do I have other people in my head? And then I just thought, wow, I'm an idiot. I really shouldn't think that. Like, it's clearly not. So I just missed it. That's a quirk, another quirk, and all the quirks added up. But despite that, only those around me figured it out, and I was oblivious. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. One thing, Scott, that she mentioned that was alarming to me was they have people with Tourette's, back to the Tourette's part of it, I believe, have a 4 times more likely to commit suicide, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And explain to Scott the reason you believe that is 4 times higher.
It's loss of control. It's humiliating to be bullied and to be treated and ostracized, and to be told to stop, to have low self-confidence issues, to feel like you have to be staying at home all the time, to isolate yourself, to feel like embarrassed because people make you feel embarrassed, or because you yourself feel like it's wrong. So yeah, it's 4 times more likely. For OCD, it's actually 10 times more. So if you have Tourette syndrome, you have 60% chance of having OCD. So you have the 4 times more likely because of Tourette syndrome, 10 times more likely because of OCD. And if you also have DID, you're 70% more likely to attempt your life.
Yeah. You know, and when you think about, when you talk about headmates, you know, imagine you're having a thought that's mixed or not positive or negative. If your headmates chime in and they amplify it before you even get feedback from somebody else, you could already be, it's like stepping on your toe with a 10-foot weight, but you've got a 50-pound weight because you've got all these people, or these headmates, if you will, that are, they're not in the cheering section per se, but they're going, yeah. They're making, they're not embracing you per se, but they're kind of slapping you around. Now, by the way, when you use the word headmate, so I'm clear, is that defined as another personality, or just you call it a headmate? Is there a difference there?
Another identity within a system of headmates so other than me. So if you consider technically the term is the analogy is only half right. So if a bowl crashes and shatters, which part is the original? So they all are the original piece, but they're all distinctive pieces now. So like, while I'm one piece, so I'm one headmate, then the other piece is another headmate, and they may be all different sizes or different structures to them, but so we're one whole. So while I am here most often, I am not everyone. I am not like, I don't become Maggie or Skittle or everyone else. They take over and I go inside, or I can see through when we're co-conscious, it's like seeing what's going on without controlling what's going on.
Got it. So when you were going to school and growing up, what was your passion for in life? Playing a guitar, the piano, volleyball, badminton, frisbee. What were you interested in as a child growing up? What did you like to do?
I know one thing, Scott. It wasn't sports. I brought up sports, and she said, "Where's the door?" She tried to leave the podcast just for talking. And she's from Canada. All I did was mention hockey. I figured that's where we go, and she didn't. So I know it's not sports. What is it?
Actually, I'm interviewing a hockey announcer who works in Canada tomorrow. Ken Daniels is his name, I believe. But anyway, I wasn't even looking for sports. I mean, what was it got you excited? How did you spend your time, as a kid growing up? Riding a bike, anything. What is it?
I liked writing. I liked drawing. I was always very creative. So mostly things to do with art. I attempted several books, starting from like when I was really little. I would write little short stories. My mom would put like 2 cardboards between papers, put lace, and put them up, and it was like a little book. So I would practice writing since I was maybe 7, put some little drawings in there. And then I made several attempts over the years, and finally my first book was technically a short story. Well, not short story. It was a science fiction story for young adults.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 12,000 years ago. We'll say that because we're not going to say my age, because if I say how long ago that was, then anyway, so yeah, it was, and that turned into a series of 2 books. And I was so like, I felt like it was something that I had to do one day. Like I need to write a book one day. It was a dream. Yeah. And you don't get the millions of dollars from it, but you get the satisfaction of it.
So what about the scientific side of it? You had mentioned in the last podcast that because Tourette's technically does not end your life, that it is less apt for science to actually pursue it. It's not a cancer or anything like that. Are there medicines out there that help you?
Yes and no. There's no medication specifically for Tourette syndrome, and there is no cure. But there are medications for other things that can have an impact. So while they can reduce the amount of tics, sometimes the side effects of the medications itself, which are usually psychiatric, are worse than the condition itself.
Yeah, and that's another thing, Scott. It's usually psychiatric, she had mentioned. Psychiatrists are more common, right, with Tourette's? That's
one of 2 reasons. The medication for it is usually psychiatric, which doesn't mean that the condition is psychiatric. It's neurodevelopmental, like autism. It's in the same part of the brain as Parkinson's and dyskinesia. It's like a movement disorder, like impulses that you can't control. So getting back to that one, it's like I think it's in the basal ganglia. There's a lot of serotonin imbalances, and it isn't mental health, but it's related to a lot of mental health things. So if you have Tourette syndrome, you're 90% likely to have a comorbid mental health disorder, which is also why you would see a psychiatrist, because most of the time you have OCD, ADHD, executive dysfunction, anxiety. So while you would maybe see a neurologist, maybe it kills 2 birds with 1 stone to see a psychiatrist.
Yeah, the underlying issues are behavioral health more than they are like dental or surgeons or optometrists. So, Melissa, we're kind of getting close to that point where Fred starts to shut us up. So let me ask you, do you have anything you want to ask me or Fred? I mean, you know Fred a little bit, but is there anything about me that, I mean, other than, looking like a senior and, knowing that I'm probably 10 times your age and, I live in San Diego. I don't know what the hell that means. It's just I'm not where Fred is, wherever that is, some sports town or something. Any questions that you have that you'd like to ask? And I'd love, by the way, if you ever do a show, bring me on. I would love to do a deeper dive on the the headmate thing, because I get that for some reason it really resonates with me, and I know I'm one of those people at my age. I still have temper tantrums, which tells me that I'm still kind of tied to my inner child. And, that inner child could be one of my headmates, but I framed it as an inner child because at least there's a clinical diagnosis for that that I could hang my hat on and, talk about it in circles, and I'm in the behavioral health business. I help people through my treatment center who suffer from substance use disorders. So that's a big passion of mine, is also helping others that way. So back to the question, any questions for us or me?
I was going to ask, is that what got you into podcasting? Like you're wanting to connect with people, to help people through your experiences, or like wanting to help them to begin with so you can reach a wider audience, you can actually connect with more people? Is that like, I'm running a bunch of assumptions here and I'll let you talk?
I was interviewed. A common person that we know said, we should get you out there. And I started doing interviews. And then, one of the guys that interviewed me said, what do you think about maybe doing a show together? And I said, okay. And then we started doing that. And actually, my podcast is called The Happy Hour. And then I met Fred, and Fred goes, what do you think about, working with me on ending the stigma, which, I didn't even have to think about that. My primary headmate said, yeah, let's do it. So I think part of the reason I'm doing this is it gets recorded and it becomes part of, the public domain. And I'm hoping people see it and they call and they go, I have a family member, I have a son, I have a daughter, I have a significant other, I have a neighbor, and they're just over the top. and I don't know what to do, because and as a family navigator, there aren't many people that do this. And you know, psychiatrists, psychologists, clinicians, interventionists, and I'm one of those, faith-based leaders. I like to believe I have a whole toolbox that I can offer somebody. And my biggest and best tool is helping them navigate. So when someone says, I'm not sleeping at night, or someone says, I'm fighting with my significant other, or my child's not listening, or I found, you know, all this, you know, paraphernalia in their room, and I'm really worried about them, and one of their best friends just overdosed and died. And so, you know, my book's called The Opioid Epidemic. You know, you see it behind me. But so anything I can do to help others is what I do each day. And I get up early, and I look forward to having a strange number in my phone so I can hopefully help somebody who's reaching out. That's what I do.
I like it. I actually have another question. So based on what I was told prior to the interview, where you work with homeless people to help them find employment. So this is something, you know, I never have changed, because I always give it away. And I'm always looking to find some way to make a difference. So what, like, is there some, like, for someone that sees someone at the metro or wherever, is there some kind of recommendation? Like, what can someone, like the general, anybody, anywho, what can I do? I feel like I just don't have enough change in my pocket.
Yeah, and giving money to homeless people generally is not a good thing. It usually goes for things that are helping them self-medicate. And look, I'm a hopeless helper, and knowing that someone's sleeping in their own urine every day, I'm empathetic, but I don't give them money because I know where it's going. But to answer your question, somebody who is really suffering from multiple issues and multiple barriers, one of the best things you can do is try to identify outreach coordinators and then point them in the direction of this person, because this person is not going to raise their hand and go, hey, Melissa, I saw you the other day and I really was inspired by your podcast, and now I'm ready to stop being homeless. What do I do? But having resources, you know, and most major metropolitan areas do. We have a thing I know in San Diego, and I'm sure they have it in Fredstown, called 211, where somebody can make a phone call, and that information database is something that they can get a hold of, from housing, transportation, to food, to detox, to stabilization, to access to behavioral health, medical, you know, concerns, dental, blah, blah, blah. So there's resources in the community. So making that connection. I mean, obviously, if someone's hungry, getting them a meal is a good place, because you can't really think clearly when you're hungry, and you can't really think clearly when you're cold, and you certainly can't think clearly if you're under the influence of something mood altering. And if you're under the influence of something mood altering, and you're suffering from mental health disorders, and you've got headmates, and you're bipolar, it's not like taking somebody to a park bench and having a 30-minute chat. It's going to require a lot of support, resources, and advocacy. And, you know, just being a cheerleader is important. But that's my simple answer to a complex issue. But on a one-on-one, it's really tough. But making it, you know, connecting with different providers and asking them how they're doing it, and maybe kind of give them guidance on where situation might be kind of inflamed, could be helpful as well, because they can't see everything. Does that make sense? I hope that helps.
It does. And I do agree on the point of not giving too much change, because I actually used to go buy these little health cookies with like the jam in them, hand those out to the homeless, or take them to the restaurant and buy them like a sandwich or like a drink, something to eat. That was usually my go-to. But yeah, I agree that change generally isn't a good idea. But if I really can't, then I probably shouldn't. But yeah, I tend to buy those.
You're a good human, Melissa. That's why I like you.
I try to disarm them emotionally. You know, when I'm talking to somebody on the street and they, hey man, you spare some change. I go, I'm too old to change. And then the follow-up question is, you know, all I need is $1. And my response is, can you break a 50? And, you know, if they ever say yes, we have one kind of conversation, but most people don't have that kind of change. So we sit down, we start talking, and that kind of breaks the ice, and we have a conversation. And then we find out, you know, they go, look, I just want to get high today. I said, okay, I get it. And there's absolutely nothing I can do for you except pray that you find your way. And, but if you're hungry, you know, or if I can point you to shelter. I actually literally had somebody, I don't know, Fred, we haven't talked about this yet. I had someone call me last week, and they'd seen me on TV, and they go, you know, you're the only one that I think I can trust. I go, well, I appreciate that, but you don't know me. And we went on for about 30 minutes on the phone, and they were giving me a list of what was going wrong. And they had like 8 hours. They're going to get kicked out of their hotel. So I put him in touch with the guy, our friend Chris, Fred. So Chris immediately jumps in his car, goes down to help. And this person gets so pissed off that they were treated, they felt like a homeless person, even though they were conveying that they needed housing, transportation, food, a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. They had crossed, I'm in San Diego. They had issues in Mexico right across the border. They got so angry. They started sending me these nasty texts. And I just said, look, all I tried to do was help. If you don't want my help, I get it. But you need to really just back up and calm down and understand that, I'm not God. That job is taken. And, let's agree to disagree. And she said, you sent this horrible person, blah, blah, blah. And this guy, Chris, he was popped up on the show here today. He's an awesome guy. He goes from San Diego to LA and Venice Beach and Riverside and tries to help people one by one. And it's tough because California has 50% of the homeless in the US right here in California. But, offline, if you want to call me, hopefully you wrote the number down. If not, Fred's got it. We'll talk about homelessness. I did it for about 18 years. I've been out of it but I'm getting dragged back in it lately because it's just gotten so bad. And now as a treatment provider, because a lot of homeless people have substance use disorders, and I have a new veteran program I've been running now for over a year, working with veterans and talk about PTS and talk about underlying untreated trauma. And that's why I like the headmate comment, because I think when you talk about it, it becomes okay to talk about it versus what's going on with them, And I was one of those people that I tried to take my own life. So I understand suicide ideation. I also understand, divine intervention. I also understand there is hope and help.
Yeah. And all that is, so I do nothing like Scott. All I do is produce the shows. So I have to up my game to match you two. And I try. I put it that way. I'm compassionate enough right now. I'm learning to gain my compassions. But the one thing we didn't talk about was self-harm. And I also wanted to touch on whatever one you want to touch on more is your PTSD of the, I guess, resolution that recently arose from this, your PTSD. Do you want to talk about that?
So, are we talking? Okay, so self-harm and PTSD. I'm waiting. Which way are we going?
Yeah.
This week or last week or some kind of this week within the week, my someone significant passed away, who was the we'll call them the perpetrator of that caused my PTSD. I'm trying to phrase that in a non-triggering way. So they passed away, and I guess I was dealing with a lot of PTSD afterwards, a lot of dissociation, a lot of flashbacks, and it was not what I expected, because I thought that I would just be relieved. I thought they would just be glad. And afterwards, I felt like this wave of a whole bunch of things, including guilt for not feeling sad, and then like, how would you say, like a lot of unexpected, not necessarily sadness exactly, but more like reliving what was happened previously that this person caused, even though they weren't there anymore. So I think just kind of maybe since I did feel safe in a way that they were gone, it kind of put my mind in a position where it felt like, okay, now we can cope with this.
Yeah. And I think those are all normal situations, considering, we've all been through something. And I went through myself, I don't have an addiction issue, but I went through a sexual abuse as a child and physical abuse as a child. And I understand what you're talking about is I often wonder, when that person does pass on, is it going to affect me at all? Or am I just going to be like, good for them? And I see the confusion of that, because a compassionate person doesn't want anybody to pass away. But when it's somebody that hurt us or harmed us, it almost feels like karmic almost. It's a karma almost. It feels like you won finally, or a relief but it's not always there. So you got any info on that, Scott? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think I don't personally think I've experienced it in a way that you're describing, but I think that people that are at the other end, that know that they may have caused harm, whether it's through direct behavior or indirect behavior, or just lack of presence of being in someone's life. Because working with homeless and ex-offenders and people that are disenfranchised, the nickname we used to have to deal with, communities throwaways, which I kind of love, because then I became a recycler. And then all of a sudden, being a recycler, I got real respect. Then I became an upcycler. We're now upcycling people, finding better uses for those people you think the community is thrown away, or the community perceives as being throwaways. And no one's a throwaway. So I think that they're at peace, if you will. And yeah, there's got to be some feelings of relief that, but on the other hand, when the damage is done, one really has to process personally and practice self-care and, go through whatever it takes to make sure that they feel better about themselves, because that person could be gone. I mean, I've worked with people who have had parents they have not seen in 15, 20, 25, 30 years, and they're still hanging on to that pain. So that's important for you, the person, to process that stuff and go through that, and I know EMDR is one of the great, underlying techniques for untreated trauma. And we work with trauma-informed clinicians all the time, because I don't know anybody today. I mean, look, I had some of it this last year and a half with COVID. Just being at home with my wife every day caused me a little bit of trauma. No, not a little bit, more like medium to high level of trauma. And I love her and she's my best friend, but you go through a catastrophic change like that, it's, and all my friends that I know that are single, I've just, can I come move in for a month? I'd be working out in my shed. I have a shed outside. That's where I've been for 18 months. If I had a bathroom, they'd probably make me live in there, but I get to come in here to do this with Fred.
That's right. Okay, so before we wrap this up, because we have to wrap it up very soon, I wanted to mention that right now over at the Scene Snobs Network, which we were a part of at one point, and unfortunately, they're shutting down their business, the network, but they're doing a 12-hour telethon right now for one of the guys whose family is in need of help. So you could head over to the Scene Snobs Network to see that. It's the Milbys. They're having a tough time right now. It's Jason Taylor's sister, whose husband fell ill of some sort, and the bills are piling up. So they're doing a GoFundMe 12-hour event over there, Mick and everyone. So they're great guys helping a friend out. But do you have anything else, Melissa, that I forgot?
I have a final thought
Yeah,
that I missed earlier. In terms of, I was thinking too, what we can give someone who is homeless and has nothing that is free and is worth more than money. Look them in the freaking eye. Because everyone looks away. Just look them in the eye. They're people too. So everyone's a person. Treat everyone like they're valuable. Love everyone. Just because you don't have money and they need help, it doesn't mean that they don't hurt when you don't look them in the eye. And if when you do, you will notice them flinch, because they never get looked in the eye. So that's priceless. Just do it. Like, look them in the eye. So I think I didn't want to go without saying that.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful thing. You're a beautiful person. You're my friend, and you can't get rid of me now. Let's call it another syndrome.
Yeah, another level of untreated trauma is Fred. Yeah. Fred is now one of your headmates, and he parks out front and he won't leave. It's just amazing. He'll let the air out of his own tires, so he just can't leave.
And she does speak French. What's your main language? What do you speak most?
I learned them both at once. So before I can remember, I don't remember learning English. I don't remember learning French. It's one of those things like you just know because you're a toddler and you don't remember being a toddler.
Right.
So and when like in daily life, I suppose it's about 50-50.
Because you never mix it. My area around here, we have a lot of Spanish and stuff. And when I'm listening to them or talking to them or listening, they tend to mix Spanish into their English, but you don't mix French into your English very much.
Oh, I do. I call it Fringlish.
Fringlish.
Yeah.
English.
But I
Well-
associate a language with a face or a face with a language. So like say I'm talking with my sister, I associate English. And then I look over and I'm looking at my friend who's Spanish Quebec. Then I just switch language just because I looked over and saw their face and it's like, okay, now I'm speaking French, and it annoys the crap out of some people, but like that's just the way it works for me.
We did forget to show this. This is your friend. What's his name?
Aldor.
Aldor, and this is very important animal to you.
Oh, he sure is.
You love your birds.
That's my man.
And he tends to repeat. Now, Scott, I had brought something up in the last podcast on, and she explained it to me, how I found it ironic that somebody with Tourette's would want a parrot who ends up repeating words, but she explained that the different, and she used it as an example. A parrot is saying it because it's enjoying it. It repeats a word that turns it on or makes it happy and stuff like that. That's why they repeat it. So when you have Tourette's, you have no control over the word that you are saying and coming out. But everybody could head over and listen to Melissa on my other show, Within the Head of Fred. That was a little more of there was a lot more comedy involved in that, and we had some fun and we talked about things. Ending the Stigma is a much more serious show usually. Scott sometimes gets off topic. I never do. But Scott likes to end the show a certain way. First of all, with his phone number. So give that out, Scott.
My phone number, if you haven't written it down yet, is area code 619. Melissa, I hope you're writing this down. 619-993-2738. And you can call or text me anytime. It is Friday, July the 30th, and I hope to hear from you before the end of July, which gives you about 24 hours.
That's right. And the reason he does that is, you often say, Scott, you would much rather spend 30 minutes on the phone with somebody than have to go to their funeral. So we are not clinically, we're able to solve all the problems and stuff, but we could guide people in the right direction they need to go if they reach out to us. Otherwise, if you're really dealing with an issue at this point, make sure you're going over to the suicide hotline, which is 1-800-273-TALK, which is 1-800-273-8255. You could also, and that's for family members or people dealing with it. So make sure you're doing that. I want to thank Melissa for joining us. I think you're brave. One thing, I don't know, is brave the right word, but I think you're so honest. I can't see how you talking about this is not a positive. I've learned in 2 shows I've done with you. I feel like I understand it now, at least a little more. Of course, I don't live it or anything, so there's always going to be trepidation of whether I can understand it, but I'm proud to be your friend. I think you're a beautiful woman. I think you're a great friend. We talk often, and continued success on your YouTube channel, which if anybody wants to go to it, I Drank the Seawater. There's a story behind that. You could hear that on Within the Head of Fred. She talked about why it's called I Drank the Seawater. And that's it. So Scott, how do you close the show, Scott? What is it?
Well, I try to get Fred to do this, Melissa, but he won't. And like to say that if nobody's told you they love you today, I love you today.
That's beautiful. You're a beautiful man, Scott. You're a beautiful
Thanks,
man.
Fred. Melissa, thanks. It was really nice to talk with you and listen to you, and I hope we'll keep the conversation going.
This was a pleasure. It really was.
Okay, hang out there while I end this broadcast. This is Ending the Stigma. And you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, and one other one. But you can go to venomstudios.com. That's VENOMSTUDIOZ.com. And I'm out. I'm Fred Carroll. That's Scott H. Silverman. And that is Melissa Seawater, the Canadian woman. I don't know what word I was looking for there. See, I'm being careful again.
One woman crew.
One woman crew. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.